Genius bar. That was you know you're a drug addict when a genius bar is a trigger. This is Anthony Boza, my co-author.
Very happy to be here. Very happy you're here.
Yeah. And I'm holding an iPad for the first time in my life. So I have to, I'm going to read, the first thing to do is read an excerpt from the book, right? All right. Well, this is a part of the book. After I got into a fight with my assistant on the Howard Stern show on the air, I thought it would be a good idea to go on a 5-day bachelor party to Amsterdam. This is an excerpt from a book about that trip. This is from Crash and Burn. Things started out all right because I slept through most of the flight, but what really helped was that I was booked into a different hotel than the other guys. I had the cash to burn, so I booked a suite in a 5-star establishment a couple of miles away from them. The first night I crashed hard because I still had a lot to sleep off, but by 4 p.m. the next day, I was rested and ready to begin my version of a well-earned vacation. Isolation and getting high. I had no problem celebrating Jason's upcoming nuptials my way, because in my mind, that was still honoring him. So I got into a cab and told the driver to find me some fun. He took one look at me and made a beeline for the red light district, where I bought a bunch of pills from some guy on the street who was wearing a beret. I remember wondering if that was Amsterdam code for dealer holding. As a rule, berets pissed me off on sight, and I refused to talk to anybody wearing them. But this guy got a pass for life. He had every opiate I'd ever heard of. So I bought a sack of pills, then went looking for a hooker, which is my chaser of choice for a double shot of opiates. I found myself a solid 7 and negotiated a rate that would get her back to my hotel. This chick was a hooker through and through, which is really what you want when hiring a prostitute. Any guy who kids himself that a woman for hire is his girlfriend, even while it's happening, is a complete idiot. The fucking business is a fucking business, so act accordingly and everyone will go home happy. This broad was amazing. Just completely a prostitute. There was no way anyone at the hotel. Bellboy to the bartender to the desk clerk manning the graveyard shift was going to address her as Mrs. Lange. And she was so accommodating, as high as I was at the time, I will never forget how understanding she was that I hadn't changed my American dollars into euros. She and I spent the rest of the night talking while crushing and snorting every flavor we could find in a bag of pills I'd scored. She spoke decent English, and we only had sex once, because like drug addicts will do, the time we spent together was all about the drugs. I was enjoying myself, so the next day I refused to get in touch with the other guys, even though they left me a few messages. I remember back to shooting Dirty Work in Toronto in 1998 with Chris Farley, because Farley would pay whores to just sit around, smoke weed with him, and keep him company because he was lonely. That's where my head was at, before banging her once. I was fascinated by the idea of paying a pretty woman to be my friend for the day. I was as far gone as Farley had been. I just wanted to spend an afternoon with a friend who wouldn't judge any awful thing I did. When it comes to hookers, the sex is secondary in my opinion. The love you rent from them isn't real, but it's unconditional. And when you're using, struggling drug addict, love and a lack of judgment are exactly what you need. I never got a real name, but I did make one up for her. This brought in my mind, I started calling her Whore Guy. Because the moment we got outside, she started giving me the history of the city. She was incredible. I started enjoying her company so much that I dodged all the guys' calls and texts and took her on a cruise through the canals of the city. I was staying at the Dillon, which is a very posh hotel, and there were sightseeing boats parked outside in the canal waiting to take rich tourists sightseeing by water. It was downright wholesome. Me, the guy driving the boat, and Whore Guy, taking in Amsterdam's historical highlights together. We saw centuries-old townhouses, government buildings, famous residences, the Anne Frank house, and all of this and more lay on either side in all of its splendor. Once again, I've got to hand it to Whore Guide. She was one informed whore. She knew more about the history of Amsterdam than the boat tour guide by a long shot. The only thing he taught me was where to get breakfast. That guy whom, for the sake of argument, we're going to call Goebbels, had a crisp Dutch accent and a high-strung voice. Basically, he sounded like a friendly Nazi. The way a counselor at a Hitler Youth summer camp might be. His Aryan nature became especially clear to me when he started talking about the Anne Frank house, explaining in great detail how long her family had hidden in the attic with the kind of restrained glee that all Nazis have when discussing the suffering of Jews. Now that I think about it, he was more of a repentant Nazi, While highlighting the finer points of the house and Anne Frank's story as if he didn't want to reveal himself, it was all very rehearsed, and I felt like I was watching Yul Brynner do his 5,000 performance of The King and I. Once he finished talking about the Franks, though, he became his sinister, joyful self. Now, he said, his voice getting louder and his eyes getting wider, if you look just past the Anne Frank house, you'll see a great place for pancakes. If I kid you not, he shouted the word pancakes as if you were saying Heil Hitler. Part of Crash and Burn.
Well,
Before I read that, I realized my mother was here.